Chief of Staff for Mayor Jerry Demings, and I want to thank you all for being here. Today is our second Orange County Citizen Safety Task Force, and it's my pleasure to introduce our co-chairs, Rod Love and co-chair Jim Coffin, and I'm going to turn it over to co-chair Love to begin today's meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Carroll. We have a robust agenda this morning, and we're going to probably try to stick to it, but I want to depart for a quick second here. I don't know if everybody's familiar with the news as to what took place yesterday, which places a high degree of urgency on the work that we need to do here today. A teenager in the Paramore community lost his life yesterday. And while we all are saddened by that, we were given the charge with 120 days to come with some recommendations to Mayor Demings. And I think sad news such as that should place a higher degree of urgency on the work that we're doing here today. So I felt compelled that we need to have these discussions, even though they're sad and they're uncomfortable. And Carol and I and my co-chair, Jim Coffin, we've sat through each and every one of the subcommittees, and we're proud that we are having uncomfortable conversations. So with that, I would like to welcome everyone to the second meeting of the Orange County Citizen Safety Task Force. Since we began work on November the 6th, the 4 subcommittees have held 8 meetings. Both Jim and I have been impressed by the participation of the members of the task force subcommittees. I want to personally thank each and every one of you. I also want to extend a continuous invitation to community stakeholders for their participation. I also want to recognize staff who's been equally involved in this process. I want to reference the commitment to the issues that we're discussing, and also I've referenced the fact that we need to get out of our comfort zones as we have these conversations. At this point, I'd like to turn the meeting over to my co-chair, Jim Coffin.
I'd just like to say that I second everything that Rod had to say, and certainly what happened yesterday is a reminder of how important this is, because we have the potential to make a substantial difference. And the commitment that the members of the task force are showing in attending subcommittee meetings and coming to this meeting are a great encouragement about what can be done. I'd like to take the roll call, and so I will call the names, and if you are here, if you would respond simply by saying here or present. And should you be filling in for someone else, give us the information about who you are, so that we know who you're, and so if when we come to the name of the person you're filling in for, you can let us know who you are. Okay, so we'll go through the roll. Rachel Allen. Here. Honorable Aramis Ayala. Rolando Bailey. Patricia Brigham.
Here.
Charles Brown. Here. Lisa Coffey.
Present.
Ruth Sedeno.
Present.
Mimi Chen. Mimi Chen. Bishop Kelvin Cabreras.
Present.
Jonathan Cox. Present. Fernando Cuevas III. Fernando Cuevas. TJ Legacy Cole.
Present.
Eric DuBose. Lisa Early. Lisa Early. Alondra Gittelson. Alondra Gittelson, Senior Pastor Terrence Gray, Pastor Terrence Gray, Roger Hanberg, Adam Hartnett,
Present.
Corey Austin Jackson,
Present.
Subhash Katil,
Present. Online.
Samantha Love,
Present.
Ricky Lee,
Present.
Bishop-elect Derek McCrae, Bishop, Chief Michael McKinley,
Captain Jerome Miller on behalf of Chief Michael McKinley.
Honorable John Mina, Miles Mulrain,
Miles is en
Maisha
route.
Murray, Nancy Osh, Javier Andres Pinero, Javier,
Online.
okay, Chief Orlando Rolon,
Here.
Patricia Rump, Ruben Saldana, Ruben, Reverend Gabriel Salguero,
Present.
Michael Scott,
Present.
Andres Toro, and was there anyone that we missed, particularly those online? Anyone who we didn't call your name?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Miles Moran says he's en route, so he'll be in about 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Approval of the minutes. The draft minutes have been provided to members for your review. Are there any changes to the minutes? Seeing no changes to the minutes, do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Motion from Sheriff Mina. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed by the same sign? Thank you. The meetings have been approved. The minutes have been approved.
Okay, and I'd like to ask the Orange County staff if we have any members of the community that have filled out a speaker card. And if so, could we come forward? Carol, could you let us know what we have here?
Thank you, Commissioner Coughlin. We do not have any public comments that was received online, nor do we have any members of the public today for comment. Thank you.
Okay, and I would just like to say to each of the task force members that as you speak within the community and let them know what you're doing, and as people suggest things to you, invite them to actually make their presentations here at the meetings that we have, because that's a good way for us to get it on the record. And so since there are no comments, we won't go through the rules about the length of the presentations and so on. And so I think this time we're ready to move into some presentations.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Antonio Sadell, who will review programs to reduce gun violence and violent crime. Dr. Sadell helps lead the national Live Free campaign to end urban gun violence and mass incarceration, and has written on these topics for the New York Times, USA Today, and other publications. Through his work, he helps promote proven community-based models for dramatically reducing gun violence in cities throughout the country. Previously, Dr. Sadell spent a number of years in public education, serving as a teacher, a principal, and deputy superintendent in urban schools. During his tenure as a deputy superintendent in the Boston public schools area, the district was repeatedly identified as one of the top 5 urban districts in the country, based on the progress of eliminating equity gaps and improving overall performance. Dr. Sadell is also the CEO of the First Revolution Consulting, which trains and coaches a range of educational, corporate, and not-for-profit leaders throughout the country. Having taught middle schoolers in Oakland, graduate students at Harvard, and aspiring school teachers at the University of Chicago, his best students were the men at San Quentin State Prison. He holds a BA in Religious Studies from Brown University, an MA in Latin American History from California State University, East Bay, and master's and doctoral degrees from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Thank you, Mr. Siddell. You are recognized.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me, Mr. Love, Mr. Coffin, everyone. I'm pleased to be with you here this morning to talk about a very important topic. As we know, gun violence in particular is not only a huge problem throughout the country, but a huge problem here in Orange County. There we go. So I'm just going to talk to you for a few minutes about proven strategies for reducing gun violence. So there's a lot of talk nationally always whenever we have mass shootings about the problem of guns. People argue about gun control, gun rights, but not everyone knows there are proven strategies for reducing urban gun violence. So we're going to talk about that today. So here in Orange County, we know gun violence is on an uptick. I won't spend a lot of time on the data. I'm sure you guys have looked at it. We've had a rise over the last couple of years. Based on data so far this year, the numbers continue to go up. We also had over 1,500 aggravated assaults with firearm last year, which was also an uptick over the last couple of years. So when we talk about proven strategies, okay, the central principle is this. Even in the most violent neighborhoods, it's a fraction of 1% that are actively engaged in gun violence, okay? Whether you're in Pine Hills, East Oakland, Liberty City, it's a tiny fraction. Here's some data from a couple of cities. Excuse me. Oakland, California has over 400,000 people. There's only about 20,000 who are involved with the criminal justice system. That's actually a lot for a city. But those who are at higher risk for shooting or being shot is only between 250 and 350 people. Okay, that's a tiny fraction of the population. If you go to Richmond, California, which is nearby, which had one of the highest homicide rates in the country, law enforcement determined out of a city of 100,000 people, only about 26 guys were responsible for about 70% of the violence, okay? So once we understand those numbers, we understand that we can't just rely on broad strategies for addressing the problem. We've got to be super, super targeted. And once we understand that, we also realize we can get our arms around the problem, all right? So this is another map. I'm using another example from another city. Once you really narrow in on the small number of people, you start mapping out the community dynamics. This is a matrix of gangs and crews in the city of Oakland, which shows the complex dynamics around violence and retaliation in the city. This takes very nuanced intelligence, law enforcement intelligence, street intelligence, to figure out the dynamics, all right? Once you do that, the cornerstone of the work is building relationships with those who are at highest risk for shooting. That's not a small job. These are typically individuals who've not been effectively touched by regular social services, okay? These are individuals that most of us are not in contact with on a daily basis. The central tenet of this is reaching out to those individuals, building relationships with them in a way that allows you to influence their behavior and lifestyle. All right. To staff this, you need street outreach workers. These are individuals typically who've been involved in these lifestyles. These are people who often were formerly incarcerated, having been actively engaged in shooting lifestyles themselves. Now reformed, they're the people who are the most credible messengers in terms of engaging this population. The next step is you need to surround these guys with a community of support, okay? You're talking about daily contact. Street outreach workers are spending time with them every day, checking in. They create life goals with them. They are rewarded for meeting life goals along the path of becoming nonviolent. They get connected with social services as necessary. There might be elder circles, mentoring systems, internship opportunities, okay? It is a way of bringing them back into the fold in a humane way that prevents the violence, okay? One thing is to arrest them after a shooting. That is important. But if you can prevent the shooting from happening, that is preferable. So the key thing to understand about these programs, I'm going to give some examples of them in a second. This is not about informing law enforcement, okay? These programs, they send people out to engage the individuals to help prevent the shootings from happening. They're in no way meant to inform law enforcement to help them close cases, okay? This is about relationships, engagement, and prevention. So there's various proven models that adhere to these principles. So there's the group violence intervention model, sometimes known as ceasefire. There's cure violence. There's advanced peace. There's even hospital-based violence intervention programs. All of these programs center on identifying the small number of individuals who are at highest risk, all right? This is a smattering of the results from cities all over the country. So take a minute and just look at some of these numbers, all right? If we could reduce shootings and homicides in Orange County by anywhere near these numbers, we would have some pretty impressive success, all right? Boston had 63% reduction in youth homicides. Oakland cut shootings in half. You can go down the list, all right? Now, how much do people think is the cost of a shooting in Orange County? Go ahead and write it down for a second. What would you estimate? Without looking at the slide, what would you estimate is the cost to taxpayers of one shooting in Orange County? Go ahead and write it down as an exercise. What is your guess? I'm a former teacher. I assign things. Go ahead and guess. How many people think it's $100,000? We got one for $100,000. How many people think it's $300,000? We got one for $300,000. How many think it's $500,000? How many think it's more than $500,000? All right. So the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform did studies in cities all around the country and calculated the actual taxpayer costs in those cities of a shooting, even if it's not a homicide, an injury shooting. In Orange County, the cost is between $839,000 and $1.6 million. Okay? Those are city, county, and state taxes. Just the Orange County portion of that is between $300,000 and over $500,000 from our coffers. And so for the cost of just one or two shootings, we can actually fund a program like one of the ones that I mentioned that will prevent way more than one or two shootings. These types of strategies pay for themselves over and over and over again, right? And so as we think about what is a life worth, we don't want to attach an amount to it. But when we think about what the county spends and what is cost effective in addition to being effective at saving lives, this makes all the sense in the world. So this is an intervention strategy, right? This does not mean that we should not be doing all the things we need to do to help transform the county, to make it more equitable, to make the conditions better for poor black and brown folks and other people who are suffering and vulnerable, right? This is an intervention strategy that can start to get results within the first year or two, right? And it should be an ongoing part of the tool belt that we use to intervene in terms of violence in the county. This is not a pilot program. This is not an experiment. This is tried and true for over 20 years in cities all over the place, okay? And what we need to be thinking about this as is just one tool in the various resources we use in order to prevent shootings and homicides. This should not be a pilot program that you do for a couple years and say, oh, the shootings went down, we don't need it anymore, okay? This is a community-based strategy that is research-based, that is effective, and should be part of the regular tool belt that the community demands every single year. It should have a permanent place in the budget, and we should rely on it to help make the county more safe. Thank you very much.
Dr. Sedale, I'm going to open it up briefly for some questions, but one of the items that I'd like to ask you is based on the unique factors of Orange County. Have you taken that into consideration, and do you have recommendations for a program that you've just described for Orange County?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple colleagues and I proposed to the county commissioners back in September using the Advanced Peace Program, which is one of the 4 I listed. I think it would work perfectly. Some members of the community have been trained in it already. Advanced Peace has been to the county. I think it's a good match for our needs, and I think it's something that we could implement pretty quickly.
Just a quick question in terms of cost. Give us just a brief idea of the kind of things that are included in those costs, $839,000 up to $1.6 million. You know, and if the shooting doesn't take place, the killing doesn't take place, do we still have an infrastructure that's still eating up those costs? You know, that's still taking much of that cost.
I'm sorry, if the shooting doesn't take place?
Right. In other words, it costs us, these shootings cost us, but if the shooting, if we cut back on one shooting,
Yeah.
have we saved that much money? Or do we have an infrastructure in place that has been divided between a number of shootings to where it's
Right.
still costing?
Right. The main costs are incarceration. So the state picks up a big chunk of it with state prison costs.
Okay.
The county cost is pretrial detention, which is a big piece. There's court costs, prosecution costs, police costs, those types of things. Emergency trauma costs as well. Those are some of the main factors.
Okay, so we're not allocating that the police department costs us X amount per year, and so we're going to allocate, you know, those costs out to the shooting.
Correct.
Okay.
So it is individualized in terms of the incarceration, right? That's
Right.
an absolute cost that would evaporate.
Okay.
Yeah.
To the members, do we have, I see Sheriff Mena, you have a question?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for your presentation, Doctor, and I'll preface this by saying I'm in favor of some sort of community intervention program. But what in these programs that you cited, what metrics are they using to measure success? Is it just the shootings going down, and how is that actually attributed to the program and not attributed to law enforcement? And then, because I noticed that you had cited Oakland used as a ceasefire, but I'm sure you saw the New York Times article that cites a rise in homicides in cities all across the United States, and including Oakland, who had a 40% increase in homicide this year. So just wondering, do they still have the program? And if so, what's the gap there? Why is their homicide rate increasing, if you know?
Yeah, so the main metrics are reduction in shootings and homicides. So researchers will go in and they'll compare areas that are treated versus not treated. Right, so actually in Miami-Dade, they've implemented a similar program this last year. I haven't seen the numbers so far where we are towards the end of 2020, but in the spring, one of the things they noticed, as you mentioned, there's been a rise in homicides nationwide. The treated area saw no rise, while other areas did. So what the researchers do is they'll compare like communities, treated versus untreated, to see the differences. In Oakland, yes, so I know that in Oakland, part of what they're trying to do is ramp up their services. Something that happens in a lot of cities, this happened in Boston, which was the original ceasefire site. Homicides go down, and then the public becomes complacent, right? Or you'll change a police chief or a mayor, or a funding cycle will shift. And then support for the program goes down because people will say, well, we've dealt with this, right? And once you do that, the shootings increase once again. So that's why it has to be a consistent program that's part of the everyday tool belt, not just a special add-on program with soft money that goes away. And we see this all over the place. So there's tons of cities that have gotten reductions, and then they back away from it, and then the shootings go up again.
I'd like to, before we take the next question, I'd like to recognize Mayor Jerry Demings for comments, statement. Welcome. There you go.
All right. Good morning to everyone. Sorry we had another meeting this morning on the Metro Plan Board, but I wanted to make sure that I got here to participate in the conversation today. Again, I know that within the last few weeks, all of you have been called to do some extraordinary work and work outside of the general meeting and your various subcommittee meetings. Did want to announce today that we have worked with Dr. Hifeng Lin, one of our statisticians here within Orange County government. She has worked to create a community crime survey that is going to be distributed within our community from December the 18th of this year through January the 11th of next year. And hopefully it will provide some feedback from our citizens from their perspective that will be used by and will be presented to this body for perhaps information and consideration as you deliberate over the recommendations that you will ultimately make to myself and the Board of County Commission. So Carol Burkett is the Deputy Chief of Staff for my office, and she has been working with the team behind the scenes to make that a reality. So Carol, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add about that at this point.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe it really the idea for the survey came from the work that our subcommittees are doing and wanting to outreach to our community. So through the Mayor's leadership, we will be able to have a survey that I know with your influence in the community, your social media websites, that we will have as much participation as possible during that time frame. So we look forward to completing that survey and getting it out to everyone and getting it online so our community can give their input and feedback. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, and with that, I just wanted to share that. Hopefully that's a bit of good news for you as we move forward together. Hopefully you all, during this pandemic, have remained safe in your respective places. We still have significant challenges, and we are not letting the work of this committee stop because of the pandemic. We're able to continue to do it in a very responsible, socially distanced manner. So thank you all for coming and meeting in person to be able to do these types of things. But I do realize also that we have a number of people who join us virtually, and I appreciate that engagement as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you, Mayor Demings. Pastor Dr. Gabriel, you're recognized.
Antonio, good to see you again. And full transparency, we've worked with the Live Free campaign. You talked about community-based violence. Could you drill down a little deeper on who the key stakeholders were, both on the outreach side and the mobilization side and the education side? Maybe there's an advocacy side. I don't know the full details, but I'd like to first, who were the key stakeholders community-based initiatives reached out to? And number two, if you have that information, who were the most effective stakeholders in that engagement? Obviously, I come from the faith-based community, so I've seen some of that work because I've done it with you, but in addition to that. And thank you again for your work.
Thank you. So, yeah, so the community engagement piece is critical, right? Because when you implement one of these programs, it cannot be implemented, people cannot have intervention done to them, right? It has to be done with them. And so critical stakeholders at the table will include people directly impacted by gun violence. Typically people who are not as involved in forums like this, not as politically powerful in the community, but have the highest stake and are closest to the pain, right? So typically you want to have folks who are directly impacted by violence, oftentimes folks who have been formerly incarcerated. Clergy are often at the table. They're the people who are burying the folks who are getting shot. They're the people comforting the families who are going through these tragedies. And you want to get public officials, other people involved as well, because you need to have the political influence to keep these strategies funded. As I mentioned, these strategies can dissolve if the political will goes away. So it's a community, a wide range of community together. There's not one body that's most effective, but I will say that efforts that lack the folks that I mentioned, directly impacted folks, formerly incarcerated folks, they typically fail. The Oakland example, it was tried once and it failed because it was implemented as just a city law enforcement effort, right? It had a bad name in the streets, it was not respected, and it failed. We had to do it again, to try again, and this time with clergy and community leaders and directly impacted folks leading the efforts, and they continue to sit at the table to monitor and shape the strategy. Those types of ingredients are going to be critical because, again, you can get folks on the street who will be very cynical very quickly if they don't see themselves represented in the effort. So, thank you for the question.
Chair Love.
I'm looking, okay, I see
TJ
Legacy, you're recognized.
Thank you for that presentation. I just wanted to ask about the effectiveness for it, and if you could give me a bit of, latitude, I'd like to just kind of present something of myself. In 2017, Ceasefire was presented to the Pine Hills community of itself through the Urban League. It was not well received, and it had clergy. There was a press conference, and we had all the stakeholders that you mentioned. It did not go over well at all, and it wasn't well received, and a lot of promises that were given to the community as far as the participation for it failed. In 2019, Florida Democrats also presented the same ceasefire program, and it did not go over well, and it wasn't well received. In fact, the Pine Hills Community Council was actually appalled because a lot of the logos for the ceasefire had an AR-15 on the actual logo. I'm familiar with the ceasefire program because I am a product of where the ceasefire program was originated. I am from Boston, Massachusetts, Dorchester, to be specific, where the ceasefire program was first adopted. So I was 10 years old when this was developed. So I'm familiar with it. What ceasefire does and these programs do, in my opinion, and what I've seen and what I know on the grassroots, it doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, solve the problem. What it does is displace the crime. So what we have is the hot zone areas that we are targeting currently right now. It will displace the crime, which will then reduce the crime in those areas. But then, as you said, and as you eloquently stated, once the program, people get happy and they say, okay, the program's done, then all of those members who weren't in those territories before during the ceasefire program, they come rushing back to get their territories, which then increases the crime. I know that because, once again, I was a product of it. So my question is how do we cowtail that to be a more effective approach? Because I feel like I'm getting a bit of deja vu with this presentation. And no disrespect to you, it's just that I believe that when it comes to intervention in this community, we need to start trying different things rather than just looking at the data and putting Band-Aids on gash wounds.
Yep, those are great points. So a couple thoughts on that. One is The ceasefire program you mentioned from a couple of years ago, there's a couple fatal flaws. One, it was not funded, right? It had some base foundational funding, about $150,000, about a tenth of what it would need to do it correctly. So no program is going to work if you shortchange it in that way. The second piece is that folks were never trained in it, okay? Not the people doing the street outreach and law enforcement, okay? When I say training, I'm talking about ongoing technical assistance. I'm not talking about a single presentation or a workshop, right? So it has to be done well. I mentioned Oakland and other places where there was failure first time around. I would also say that all the people I mentioned were not seriously at the table, all right? So it's different from a couple of people showing up at a meeting or two versus really shaping the program. And so the other difference is what I'm personally recommending is advanced peace versus the ceasefire program, which is a little bit different, okay? It shares many of the key principles, but I think it's a program that can work well for Orange County, but we have to invest in it, okay? If done correctly, it doesn't simply displace the violence because it's a person-based strategy, at least it should be. And so, because we know violence doesn't stick to a single neighborhood, okay? Somebody can shoot someone and leave the neighborhood. Retaliation might follow that person, right? It could go someplace else. And so that's why, if done well, it's based on the specific individuals who are at highest risk. And if you have real relationships with those individuals, them moving from one neighborhood to the next is not going to finish the program.
Chair Love.
Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Dr. Cadell, thanks for your presentation. So my question is, ceasefire is implemented across the country in a number of areas in a lot of different versions. Can you share with us which model which is more comparable for our city, you know, our county and city? Because like here we have gangs, but they're more hybrids and cliques. So, you know, maybe in LA you have Bloods and Crips and things like that. But can you share with us which models would be more reflective of what our community looks like here and the success of those specific programs?
Yeah. So just because sometimes people use ceasefire interchangeably with all these models. Ceasefire is one specific model. The Democrats, you know, when they called it ceasefire, and I told them I would suggest you don't call it ceasefire because this is not what you're talking about is trying to promote strategies to reduce gun violence, but that's different than the ceasefire program. And so sometimes there's confusion about that. The four models that I shared are group violence intervention, which is sometimes referred to as ceasefire, cure violence, which was based out of Chicago originally, but is spread into cities across the country, advanced peace, which is the one that I'm recommending, and the hospital-based violence intervention program. So those are the four that share these common principles about really individualizing the work, and I would recommend advanced peace out of those. So that would be my recommendation.
Dr. Sedell, can we get a copy so that Ms. Carroll can send out to all of the board members of your recommendations for this subcommittee, for this committee?
Yeah, absolutely. I can do that today.
Okay, we have additional presentations that are going to take place by the co-chairs. We also have another presentation that's going to take place shortly here with Dr. Nelson. So can we take one other question if there's one left? I saw a hand go up. Oh.
Just briefly, if you'll let us know why you're choosing that or recommending that program for us.
Well, so one of the members actually of the task force, Miles Moraine, was actually visited and shadowed the program. So several years ago, then Sheriff Demings asked the community, had some town halls, asked the community to do some research. People took that seriously. Folks went to different parts of the country and researched one. The advanced peace model is one of the ones that we looked at closely. Miles spent days with them, shadowing them. They've been out here meeting with the community and sharing their work. I think it's a good match. It's a program you can do that's purely community-based. Whether or not law enforcement wants to be involved, it can still stand on its own. So I think it would be a good match.
Chair Coffin, I'd like to turn the meeting back over to you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We appreciate it. And we have another presenter who's with us, Dr. Randy Nelson, and he will be presenting on effective community engagement. Dr. Nelson currently serves as the director of the Bethune-Cookman University Criminal Justice Administration Graduate Program and Center for Law and Social Justice within the College of Liberal Arts. And I'd expect you to be able to recite that back to me. His academic and professional career have focused on developing and evaluating delinquency prevention strategies designed to address the problems negatively impacting disadvantaged communities. Dr. Nelson has an extensive history of working with nonprofit, faith, and community-based social service organizations to develop and effectively achieve their programmatic and outcome goals. Through his work, Dr. Nelson has been able to influence various evaluation projects throughout the state of Florida. He's the founder of the Situational Environment Circumstances Mentoring Model, which was designed to meet the unique educational, social, and emotional needs of high-risk Black males. The 2013 Florida legislature provided funding for the SEC program as a down payment toward the changing trajectory of Black males in Florida. Dr. Nelson is a nationally recognized law enforcement training consultant in the areas of community policing and engagement strategies. He has authored more than 50 technical reports and research publications and presented at numerous state and national conferences on effective strategies to engage communities of color in general, males in particular. And his full bio is included in your packet. And we thank you, Dr. Nelson, for being with us. And some of you have heard him present before just recently, and we're delighted to have you continuing to present more. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. What I would surmise from that introduction is that I'm a country boy from Wakulla County, Florida. God blessed the ability to put basketball in the hoop, and I'm no more, no less. So thank you for the introduction, but I'm just Randolph's oldest son. So I appreciate you. I won't take much of your time. I want to personally thank the mayor for putting together this task force. This work is needed and necessary. But my conversation today is the community. It's the folk that live, breathe, sleep the violence that we're talking about. We all have a role. Don't get me wrong. We all have a role. But their voice is the most powerful voice in the room. So when the mayor mentioned the survey, that was music to my ear. I know it's going to cost money, but somehow, some way, those folk in the community, we need to put the survey in hand. We need to find social media and ways to getting it out through social media is one thing, but we need to touch the people. I've had the opportunity to go in communities from Bakersfield, California to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. But not one of those communities have I ever gone in and said, you need to do this, you need to do that. I put my jeans and tennis shoes on. I go to the barber shop. I go to car washes. I have conversations. Because it's very difficult to help a people if you don't know a people. Whether you're the mayor, whether you're a police officer. It's very difficult to help a people if you don't know a people. The conversation about violence, and God has a way of bringing things to our attention because we tend to want to go this way, that way. But on Saturday, working in Paramore, we had young people that live in Paramore. We had adult parents that live in Paramore. We had police officers that work in Paramore community. 6 hours talking about solutions. We all know the problem. Those are easy to identify. But we were talking about solutions. 3 days later, 16-year-old, murder. The individual that was working with us that day, kids from that very same Boys and Girls Club, were in the room trying to come up with solutions. Murdered 3 days later. So the work is needed and necessary, but it's not hard work, it's hard work. 8 months in America, across the world, we were able to develop a vaccine. 8 months. Imagine if that level of commitment was made throughout America about death and dying in our communities. It's a lack of commitment. That's what that is. If all over the world, folk can come up with a vaccine in 8 months, 2 or 3 different vaccines, but that's because that virus affected everybody. This urban violence isn't affecting everybody. But the problem is, at some point and at some time, violence is going to touch doorsteps and other places. It won't just be Paramount. It won't just be Washington Shore. So let me get off my soapbox for a minute and let's do our work. I use this, and though most of my work is relative to police and community engagement, all of the subcommittees that we were talking about is about that work. The presentation before mine, you guys are going to have to do something, and I'm not here to tell you what you have to do. But something has to be done. But I don't think nothing has to be done that's permanent. The reason we're doing this, the reason you have to do something, is because we haven't done what we need to do in the first place. Children, babies are not born gangbangers, killers. They're born innocent. They're empty laptops. It's what's being placed in them through their environment, through their conditions. Let's fix that. Then we don't have to spend millions of dollars talking about a ceasefire or a ceasefire or east fire or whatever fire. Let's fix that. And that's a part of the conversation. Now, this mission statement, I use it all over the country. It comes from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Department. It says, to serve and protect in partnership with our community. Now, whether they're doing that or not is irrelevant to me. It tells me as a law enforcement agency that they recognize policing isn't something that's done to a community, it's done something with the community. And partnerships denotes relationship to me. Marriages, give and take, two-way accountability, responsibility, sacrifice. For communities to be safe, it requires that on both the part of law enforcement and the part of communities. The social contract theory, which all law enforcement should be based, is that people give police their authority. Police doesn't get their authority from the mayor, from the governor. Police authority comes from we the people. So their authority to take life and liberty is from the people. If any day in America the people were to wake up and say the police are not legitimate, we don't believe that they have our best interest, there's nothing the police could do. You can take every police department in America, combine the military, you'll get maybe 1 million guns. There are 350 plus million Americans. There's nothing that can be done. So the legitimacy of police starts and stops with the people. This is powerful, and I use it also with, you can take out law enforcement and put every one of your names, position, places in this statement instead of law enforcement. Law enforcement is one of America's most noble professions. The actions of any law enforcement professional, teacher, doctor, substituted in an instant can impact an individual for life and even a community for generations. That's powerful. Can impact an individual for life and a community for generations. And that's evident in our communities throughout America. The lack of commitment to address the fundamental issues. A mother in Ellsworth should not be concerned about her child being injured or harmed by a gangbanger, police, or any otherwise. A mother in Paramore, Washington Shore, Mercy Drive, deserve no less. That's when we're committed. I want to show you a quick video that I often use. That could be a lot of us in this room. It has been and will continue to be me. Because through my lens, how I see the world, which is based on how I was raised, where I was raised, who I was raised by, I see the world through that lens. As a black man born and raised in rural North Florida, I see the world through that lens. So it's possible. Not on my heart, not to my heart, because my heart is in the right places, but there are times that I'm thinking I'm helping the people, and I'm actually not. Because it's through my lens that I'm trying to help them. And I don't know their walk, their situation, their condition. Sometimes we have to step back, and I think that's why the beauty of having a survey from the people. They'll tell you what they need. We just have to listen sometimes. They'll tell you. But we definitely need to listen. Another issue. As I said before, these communities, Washington Shore, Paramore, they didn't just get here today. Those are years and years of neglect. Years and years of trying or half trying, partially trying. It didn't get here over years. But this historical irony that the communities that call the police the most, if you look at call volume and you look at the rate of call volume, whether we're talking Paramore, Pine Hill, Mercy, this isn't Country Boy Randy. Look at the data. It'll tell you. The people that call the police the most are the most distrustful of police. You can substitute police for government, for school system, and rightly so. 99.9% of the failing schools in Florida are in poor, disadvantaged, typically minority communities. And if we're not educating, what do you expect? What do you expect? It's their resiliency that gets them out. It's not our help. There's no help from us. It's their sheer strength and resiliency that are getting a lot of these kids out of communities. Some go back to help, others don't. The scar and the trauma prevents. And we have to have a lot more folk in the community that need to go back. But that's a conversation. So on the one hand, they call you the most, and they're the most distrustful of you. There's a history and a story behind that. And law enforcement needs to know that. Everybody in this room needs to know that. Because as I said, you can't help a people unless you know a people. And knowing them is knowing that history. I get law enforcement often, you know, I didn't do that. That was before, absolutely, it was before your time. A lot of stuff was before your time. Teachers, I didn't do that. Absolutely, you didn't. But we all have a responsibility for fixing it. Collective efficacy. We all have a role and responsibility for fixing it. Now you look up there, the communities that we're talking about, and let's be specific. I know folk don't like label. If you fix the mess, then we don't have to label it. So if we were to look at who's dying on the streets, take away race, take away whatever you want to take, but who's dying, fix it. We don't have to label it. But until we fix it, we can go this, we can go that, you have to direct the services where the need is. No one can argue that. Police do it with CompStat. Juvenile justice years ago, Rod Love did it with zip codes. You have to fix the problem to prevent the label. Most of the worst, least of the best. These communities typically have most of the worst, least of the best. Professor Bill Jones at Florida State University years ago, God bless his soul, coined most of the worst, least. That was relevant then and is relevant now. Now, when you look at that and you just think of police, there's not a damn thing up there that police control. And some may say that they control arrests or crime. No, police doesn't have any control over that. They're reacting to something. But there's nothing that they have control up there. But the reason that people call them is because of everything that's up there. So when I say that not only law enforcement, prevention, DJJ, we've been playing checkers a long time. This is a chess game. We address those issues. A lot of the other issues we're talking about would be behind us. So let's call it the COVID. Let's call this crisis that we see in our community COVID. Because every now and then something happened. George Floyd happened. Not only that it happened in America, but people across the world saw a black man killed on national television without any regard. And everybody rose up. But damn it, that same rise, that same commitment need to be Pioneer, Mercy Drive, Paramore yesterday damn day. That same. This isn't hard work, it's hard work. What do we love? And I'll leave you with this last video. And as I said before, I do not promote any particular program. It's what the people say that they want. It's what the community say. But this is a fine illustration of policing with a community as opposed to policing a community.
They would have shootouts out in the back there. We didn't have no relation with them because they came up here sometime with an attitude. Now, if they came up here and talked to us like we was human beings, it would have been fine. But just because you got a badge and a gun on, you can't come up here talking to people like they dogs. They come up here, jump out the car, and sometimes they would try to make you tell them things. In order to give respect, you got to give some. I come out and I see one of you, and I smile and wave, and you smile. Y'all trust y'all highly. Now I do. When I look out here, it look like a ghost town. I could get in the bed and sleep practically all night long.
So what I would leave with you, and as I said, by virtue of you guys being in this room, you don't need a lecture from Country Boy from Wakulla County. You don't. You're here because of your heart. We just got to get those around us to commit. Same commitment that we made and have made as a country with this virus. We need to treat this as a virus, a health concern, a national health concern. And then we'll see where. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your commitment. But everybody got to stay on the wall. This isn't hard work, it's hard work.
Thank you very much, and don't run away yet. There might be a couple of questions that we have from the task force members, so this is your opportunity. We have to move along fairly quickly because we have other things to cover. But anyone have a question that you would like to direct to Dr. Nelson?
Yes, I have a question. First of all, I would like to say that was one of the best presentations I ever heard. You hit the nail on the head with the actual problems that we exist today. One of the things I always say that we don't like to go back to the past, but the best predictor of the future is sometimes the past. And it appears to me that every decade that the community presents its own problems, and no difference between the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, which makes up a generation. And my question is to, how do we reconnect and sustain some of these programs, which was very good? I often think about the programs in the 60s, like the Neighborhood Youth Corps, Job Corps, and other programs that have addressed the problems at hand in that particular decade. So how do we make the connection to continue this process, sustain what we have done in the past and connect it with where we are going in the future? And that was, I think, as I listened to your presentation, it was, you took me back through time when I was a member of the Neighborhood Youth Corps in Jacksonville myself, and part of what happened to me and how it helped me briefly, but it was not sustainable in terms of funding and those type of things that we need to sustain these programs. Seem like we are more reactionary opposed to proactive in addressing these. So how do we sustain that based on what your presentation, which was, by the way, the best, really good presentation.
Thank you. Connecting, I think there's a lot of different connecting. Connecting from your perspective with things that have worked. I came out of the academy in 1989, 1990, somewhere around there. I had a cell phone in the bag like this, handcuffs, and a 357 revolver, working in South St. Petersburg. The cell phone fits in your hand. So it's taking some of those things that have worked, but everything, every profession, every individual must evolve because the world is evolving. So I do think taking some of the things that work, but it has to evolve. And part of that is, part of evolving is recognizing that we don't know everything. Florida State University, I have nothing but praise for Florida State University. But earning a PhD from Florida State University allowed me to get into doors. Living as a black man in North Florida and then in my early years in the projects of Tampa taught me far more about what's needed and necessary than anything I've ever learned in the classroom. Some of it is just getting back to the basics. Some of it is just getting back to the basics. And as a community, when we talk about law enforcement, everybody is so hope. As much power and authority they have, damn right, hold them accountable. But that young man was killed yesterday. Law enforcement didn't do that. We have to have that same interest, because it's easy. When I go to law enforcement, they blame the community, social media. You go to the community, they blame law enforcement, and discrimination is here. That's not even something our argument. Whether institutional discrimination, that's not even an argument point for me. Nor is defunding the police. Those aren't arguments for me. Fixing stuff, we can have that conversation. But we have to wait what works and what doesn't.
Dr. Nelson, realizing that you work throughout the state, but in particular working in Orange County, is there anything in particular that this task force can piggyback off of that's in existence now in Orange County?
Orange County, as I said before, so this is my first rodeo in Orange County, so my body of work has been in Orange County, working with young black males in the foster care system, juvenile. So the work is here, and a lot of the beauty about Orange County, we have folk that are doing this work and have been doing this work. But you got a spot over here, a spot over there, a spot over there, until it's collective work. Until it's collective work. I'm not competing against you, we compete to save lives. Until it's collective work, we'll always be here, task force and everything else, we'll be here. Let's get it right. Why can't this be the last thing in task force? Are we committed to making this the last task force? That's the conversation.
Dr. Nelson, thank you for your presentation. You are definitely preaching to the choir, and many of the things that you've stated, we have echoed millions of times within this community, because I think that while we talk about holding law enforcement accountable, everyone needs to be held accountable. The community, the law enforcement, and everyone who has a duty and a responsibility, which is each of us. And I think that oftentimes we weigh on one end, which I believe that law enforcement should be held accountable, but we don't hold the community at large accountable. For instance, with the shooting on yesterday, as I spoke with Chief Rolón this morning, what I was happy to hear was that the community immediately began to respond to the Orlando Police Department to participate in finding out who took the life of this 15-year-old young man. I commended Chief Rolón by saying this, that while we have a lot of issues on the table between the community and law enforcement, I will have to applaud him for his effort in being transparent and responding to what protesters and others and community leaders like myself have asked as it relates to bettering that relationship between the law enforcement and the community. While there's a lot more things that need to be done, I had to echo the fact that the reason why you see some of the community feeling more comfortable to participate is that when there's a level of trust restored because of transparency and because of his proactive leadership, it motivates the community to be more involved. The next thing that I want to ask, and I just want to make that statement, but what I really want to ask is this. In a perfect world, collaboration would exist. In a perfect world, all of us would just bring our resources to the table and realize that, hey, you do this well, I do this well, let's work together and fix our community. Dr. Nelson, you know that we don't live in a perfect world, and our community is far from perfection. So my question is, if in fact we never get to the place of genuine 100% collaboration, what's next? What do we do to make it work?
That's an excellent question, because we don't live in an ideal world, and you won't get any argument from me on Chief Rolón. I was in a couple of weeks ago, and our team trained, 250, almost 300 OPD police officers. And like I said, I'm country. I'm 54 years old. I've lived longer than I probably have left, so I could care less what they think of me. We had frank conversation. So they came in and they were uncomfortable. And I told them up front they were going to be uncomfortable, because it's somewhere between comfortable and uncomfortable. There's knowledge and growth. That's what I needed them to see. Same thing with the community. I don't let the community go on that police did this, police did. Damn right, hold them accountable. Now, what are you going to do about the young man that got killed yesterday? So those are conversations. Now, what I say to about with collaboration, and we don't live in an ideal world, do your damn part. Let's do our part. Wherever you sit, whether you're in the pulpit
or whether you're on the back seat, do your part. Lives are depending on you. As again, treat it like it's COVID. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nelson, and we appreciate your thoughts that you have shared with us. And so let's turn it back over to Co-Chair Love, and let's hear a little bit about what some of the subcommittees are doing.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Dr. Sedell, Dr. Nelson, thank you once again for your presentation. Thank you for your presentation. The subcommittees have been hard at work, and the co-chairs are here today to provide a brief update on their work. Let me just also say, we're past the getting to know you part. We've been in these subcommittee meetings, and the conversation that has taken place has been the conversation that needs to take place. It's been a great deal, let me emphasize this, a great deal of uncomfortable conversations. But boy, wait till you hear the work product from that uncomfortable conversation. So I'd like to, at this moment, call up the Reverend Dr. Gabriel to present for the Prevention Subcommittee.
Good morning. Thank you again for all your time and sacrifice. Mr. Mayor, thank you again for convening us and the co-chairs. Mi nombre es Gabriel, Reverendo Gabriel Salguero. I'm Reverend Gabriel Salguero. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Prevention Subcommittee, together with Mrs. Lisa Early, who could not be here today. You will hopefully see on the screen the names of our members, and I want to be respectful of your time, so I will go through this rather quickly. Let me see. This is where in church we say we're experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by. And so there are the names of our members, most of which were here today: Ms. Ruth Cedeño, Ms. Mimi Chan, Ms. Lisa Coffey, Mr. Eric DeBose, Mr. T.J. Legacy Cole, Maisha Murray, Ms. Michelle Murray, Mr. Javier Andres Piñero, and Mr. Andres Toro. I thank them all for their work. And what I want to do today is just do two things. Number one, talk about what our foci are. What we've, in the two meetings we've had since our first meeting, what are our foci? And you'll see that we've met twice since our November 6th meeting. We've decided in the Prevention Subcommittee that our foci, part of our foci will be children and young people in high violent crime areas in the most impacted zip codes. And so it's very focused. I think you've heard from many of the presenters that the challenge that we're facing is focused in small groups, but in major areas. And so we have decided as a committee to focus on those most impacted zip codes. And we've defined it this way: to respond to the causal factors with recommendations around prevention for implementation. And so we've taken a holistic view. You saw from Dr. Sedell, part of his 3 buckets, he talked about prevention, intervention, and transformation. And we're trying both in the Prevention Subcommittee to include some of that transformation. For us to respond to the causal factors, we've taken a holistic view. And so that's our philosophy or methodology of approach, a holistic approach. And that requires review of what is existing, review gunshot incidents, violent offenses, homicides, and trauma, both its impact on perpetrators and victims. And part of that holistic review is on causal factors, not just the immediate, but the long-term and sometimes intractable. We heard some of that in the previous presentation right before me: poverty, housing, family trauma, and education. With that in mind, we've focused on reviewing existing outreach programs and their levels of effectiveness. One of our colleagues here this morning, just before I came to the podium, asked what is already existing, and so the prevention subcommittee has taken quite seriously what exists, but not just what exists, but what is its level of effectiveness and impact towards transformation and prevention. Later we'll be meeting with the intervention subcommittee to talk about its effectiveness, not just in prevention, but in intervention. To that regard, we've heard at the prevention subcommittee, as you have heard this morning from Dr. Randy Nelson from Forefront Consulting. And here's what we've done heretofore: review of existing prevention programs and services. We were flooded, I think, inundated with what's already existing. It was quite an extensive review, and for that we thank Dr. Nelson. An analysis and comparison of Orange County's children's programs and services. A comprehensive, again, we'll hear that theme recurring, holistic. A comprehensive assessment of youth needs and distribution of resources. And then we use Dr. Nelson's framework around the 4 domains. I want to draw your attention to this point. We, in our reviews, have discovered or found, or maybe we've not discovered, but it's been brought to our attention, the 9 zip codes that account for the majority of juvenile arrest and detention, dependency involvement, abuse and neglect reports, low 3rd grade FSA reading scores, low-performing schools, teen pregnancies, and infant mortalities. It will probably come to no surprise to this august body that those zip codes overlap. And so that's why we're focusing on those zip codes as our areas of prevention, of focused prevention. Of course, our work is data-driven in our decision-making and focused on evidence-based programming and common outcomes. I would add the word effective outcomes to determine their not just their productivity, but their continuance. Allow me, let me see that. There we go. Here are some of the next steps that we're doing. As I said, part of our work in the first 2 meetings at least is to review what's existing and from a holistic approach. So you'll hear those 2 words over and over from the prevention committee: what exists, holistic, and what is effective. Those 3 words are common threads in our conversations with the committee. Review services provided by Orange County Mental Health and Homeless Division Manager Donna Weich. Identify root causes for violent crimes for at-risk children and youth, and we've done quite a bit of that work already. Identify the programs that provide effective alternatives to gang recruitment. I draw your attention to this. Most people, when they hear the headlines, they talk about the big programs, but we're also talking about community-based programs and lesser-known programs that have high effective rates. I think sometimes emerging programs have high levels of effectiveness that are not seen by large numbers of people, and I think part of the prevention committee's task is to highlight those effective, smaller, lesser-known programs and hopefully build them to scale so that we can impact a larger group of people impacted in these at-risk, or what I like to call at-promise communities. A review of the juvenile arrest data from law enforcement and Department of Juvenile Justice, including policing and arrest statistics. So that's part of the conversation around community policing and what is the impact of policing in these communities. Gunshot incidents, violent offenses, and homicides. Here, I also want to underscore I think this might be important for the other subcommittees that have not been in conversations with us directly, but we will meet with in the future. Review of the communication and marketing campaign strategy. I think that one of the challenges we need to overcome, or what we've seen as a committee, is knowledge and awareness of what already exists. Como dicen en mi familia, que ya existe, what's already there. What is already there? And are we doing our very best to make sure the community has both access and knowledge about what's already there, and once they have knowledge, that the access is not cumbersome. So part of that is around communication and marketing, but another part of that is around accessibility. And we are then planning a joint meeting. We actually have a meeting tomorrow with other subcommittees, including the intervention subcommittee. I am honored to be one of the co-chairs, and I will just say we have a robust committee, and I am deeply thankful for their transparency, their honesty, and their pushing on this important issue. On a personal note, I want to extend our condolences to the loss of that 15-year-old. For me, that's a child, but an adolescent, and our empathy and condolences as well in this Advent season. I'm open for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Pastor Gabriel. Seeing no questions? Thank you, Pastor Gabriel.
It is quite interesting. As co-chairs, we've had the privilege of going to all of the subcommittee meetings, and each has its own idiosyncrasies, its own uniqueness. But there's one thing that is very common to all of them, and that is the enthusiasm and also the commitment to doing something significant. And so a big thank you to all the subcommittees, because that's where the work really takes place. I'd like to introduce at this time Bishop Kelvin Cabreras, who's the co-chair of the Intervention Subcommittee. And so Bishop Cabreras, will you tell us what you've been doing and what plans you have?
Good morning to everyone, and good morning, Mr. Mayor. We want to publicly rise and thank you for your leadership in bringing this task force together. We appreciate you, and to our co-chairs, Love, and co-chairs Coffin, who have done a great work in not only leading the main task force, but attending all of the subcommittee meetings and hearing, and not only listening, but also interjecting and offering advice to keep us on track and to guide us as we come and work toward a comprehensive plan to present to the mayor and the Board of County Commissioners. I rise today representing a very robust and passionate group of individuals in the Intervention Subcommittee, which I am so honored to serve as co-chair along with Samantha Love. These committee members are namely Rachel Allen, Rolando Bailey, Charles Brown, Corey Austin Jackson, Miles Moraine Jr., and Ruben Somebody help me.
Saldana.
Thank you. I didn't want to mess. I don't like people messing up my name, so I wanted to make sure that we said that right. With that being said, this particular group has come together, and what I love about us is we just lay it out there. We speak the truth. We talk about what we feel. And it even came to a point in our committee, before I get into this presentation, that it was stated, if it's going to be more of the same, we don't want to be a part of it. And it got to a place where we took 20 minutes in our committee meeting to convince one another that it was worth remaining. It was worth staying to be a part of this, to give it a try, to make sure that not for our own feelings, but for the sake of those who are not in this room to speak for themselves, we must stay and we must remain and fight the good fight to make sure that this particular intervention takes place. I think that when we look at the word intervention, that's a standing in the gap or standing in between something. And I believe that out of all of the subcommittees, and all of them are very important, intervention is very, very significant, because again, you're standing in between of something to bring a halt or cease to it. And a plan, a comprehensive plan to present to our mayor is very necessary in this hour, simply because of what has happened on yesterday. 15-year-old Antoine gunned down in broad daylight, and before the Orlando Police Department could get there, his remains were presented on social media as if it was some trophy piece to celebrate his death within our community.
which means that not only were people there, but people know exactly who were involved and who did it. And what really concerns me, as you heard Dr. Nelson say as I'm coming to our presentation, is that this young man in the same boys club that served him just days prior were talking about measures that can be put in place to intervene, to keep something like this from happening. But I'm sad to say again, we ran too late, because now we have another life that has been lost. And with that being said, that's what drives not only the passion of the intervention subcommittee, but the passion of every committee that is represented in this room. And from the beginning in our subcommittee meeting, we met twice since November 6th. And in those meetings, the first thing that we wanted to do in meeting number one was to define our focus and understand our foundation that we were going to build our subcommittee on to prepare to present the plan to the mayor. And after looking at the data and looking at the data and statistical report that was given by our law enforcement leaders, and looking at most of these crimes that have been committed in our areas due to firearms, etc., were of course committed by juveniles. And because of that, we made our focus in intervention juveniles and gun violence. Because of course that while there are other heinous crimes that are taking place, this is what is central to what's causing what's happening now and yesterday. Once again, double down on why our focus is juveniles and gun violence. We have a 15-year-old involving a firearm where a 15-year-old's life was lost. The subcommittee objectives are as follows. We are reviewing existing programs and services in the community, simply because, as it has already been stated by the prevention presentation, is that many of us have been on task force. I have task force after task force, year after year, and involvement on committee after committee. I've worked with various sheriffs and chiefs of police. But the reality is there's some parts of those task force that did well, and there were other areas where it was just a data report where we reported it, it went into a file, but nothing really happened. What we said as an intervention committee is that we wanted to make sure that as a committee in this comprehensive plan that there will be something put together that not only we can implement now, but it's something that can be ongoing, that even when governmental administration leadership changes, leadership of different agencies changes, the work that we've done on this task force will go on and not just serve in the at-risk or the high-risk communities that we like to mention a lot, but something that can be implemented throughout Orange County, simply because public safety is being threatened all over our county and not just in one community. As I have specifically stated on many occasions, that crime is coming to a neighborhood near you. With that being said, with the review and the existence of programs and services in communities, we want to also, we're reviewing intervention strategies that deter the possession, the carrying, and the use of illegal firearms. Listening at the presentation from the ceasefire, of course, goes along somewhat in line with some of the things that we want to do. But of course, I want to have more conversation with Dr. Zadell, as I've heard this presentation before, and TJ Legacy brought up some very significant points that when this particular program was presented to our community, it did not work. But I'm glad that Dr. Zadell responded with why it did not work, so that if it's something that we intend to embrace again, we can correct those different measures and maybe even change the name ceasefire. I know the Pine Hills community hated the idea of being called ceasefire, and begin to address some of those things that we could move forward and see some change in the community, just using that as an example of different strategies that we're looking at. Then identifying strategies that will mobilize the community and enhance engagement. As Dr. Nelson said, it's not a law enforcement problem. It's not a Mayor Dimmons and the Board of County Commissioners problems. It is a collective issue that all of us must mobilize and do our part in effort to get that done. And so our intervention committee is looking at ways, a part of our plan, to outline how that type of engagement can be enhanced within our community. Since that time of the last two meetings, we've had presentations as such to help guide us as we hone in on many of the things that I previously stated. Dr. Randy Nelson from Forefront Consulting, who you just heard from, came and offered an analyzation and comparison of Orange County Children Program and Services. Him and Angela gave a very thorough presentation to us to help us understand the comprehensive assessment of youth needs and distribution of resources, the community level data framework of the 4 domains. The findings were the 9 zip codes account for the majority of juvenile arrests and detention, dependency involvement, abuse, and neglect reports, the low 3rd grade FSA reading scores, the low-performing schools, the teen pregnancies, and infant mortalities. As you heard Dr. Nelson said, if we fix the issues of the low performance in school and the teen pregnancy and the issues that we have within our community that are so systemic, then we can fix the issues with the firearms and the various arrests and the crimes and murders that are taking place within our community. So we cannot just pin it all on what law enforcement needs to do. We understand as an intervention subcommittee, it's something that we need to look at comprehensively as a plan of what we all do collectively to deal with this particular data that was presented to us by Dr. Nelson that you just heard moments ago. The data-driven decision-making, evidence-based programming, and common outcomes to determine effectiveness was also a part of Dr. Nelson's presentation. And of course, Mr. Mayor, I'm glad you're here. In our intervention committee, everybody became passionate because you know when you hear the mayor say that the county has $20 million, boy, when people hear money, everybody, yes, my program needs that. And because of this presentation from Dr. Nelson and Angela, it kind of put things in perspective of how the funds are dispersed, who the funds have been dispersed to, and the outcomes of those particular programs, of how they are managing those funds and how it is impacting the need of the area. And of course, as we begin to analyze that, there were various questions that came up which we will begin to work to put in our plan, because we want to make sure that even those who have the funds that they have for their programs now are actually meeting the needs and providing services. And it came up that because of COVID, it has affected how services are provided within the county. And we even pushed back in our committee and said that COVID is not going anywhere anytime soon. So if we're going to wait on COVID to start fixing the problem or looking on those outcomes, we're going to have a whole nother issue together. So we're going to have to find a way to circumvent our challenges of our present time and begin to still make sure that the needs for these communities and these young people that are being impacted are met. So those are some of the things within our intervention committee that we began to discuss and talked about that we're going to work on. These are our
Let's try to wrap it up if you can. We're running out of time.
Yes, sir. Our next steps are this, and I'm running on. Our next steps are this. We are the review of juvenile arrest data from law enforcement and the Department of the Juvenile Justice. We're going to have the juvenile justice leaders come in and give us a report, and then look at the number of arrests, the arrest zip codes, the use of civil citation, and the arrests involving guns. And then we discuss equity and equality of programs and services. And then, of course, we're going to be in our meeting today, after this meeting, reviewing the task force report of 2007 and 2016 crime task force reports to see what has worked, what has been implemented, what was not, and how that would help shape and craft what we are going to present to the mayor and the county board of commissioners. And finally, we're planning a joint meeting with the prevention subcommittee and the intervention committee, along with the members of the community, to come so that we can collectively put our heads together and hear from the credible voices of the community as we shape and craft a report for the mayor and board of commissioners. That is the report of the intervention subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Cabarrus. It's my pleasure to introduce the co-chair of the Enforcement Subcommittee, Ms. Patricia Rump.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mayor, for allowing me to serve as co-chair.
and good morning to the co-chair and everyone that's here. And I just want to say to staff that's worked with me has been very well, and this Orange County staff has worked very well, so thank you for the staff there. I want to be mindful of the time. When I was asked to do this presentation, they said 5 minutes, so I'm going to try to be mindful of the time of 5 minutes. I just want to say this glove on my hand is not a fashion statement. I have to take care of this hand during the cold weather, so I'm taking care of my business. So anyway, the task committee, law enforcement committee has met several times, twice to be exact. And in our first meeting, we did quite a bit of brainstorming. And from that brainstorming, we came up with several ideas. And we narrowed it down from that first meeting to for time's sake, draw your attention to 4 different topics. We talked about 4 different we talked about 4 different main things that we could do as far as law enforcement concerned, as far as programs that was effective. B, we talked about different legislations that law enforcement could lobby for as far as gun violence in the community. And then C, I'm gonna narrow it down to, we identify strategies how law enforcement can mobilize with the community and work with the community. And then D, we talked about how law enforcement can work with other law enforcement organizations. So let's go back to A. We talked about the 4 different types of programs that law enforcement could work within the community. And we read an article, and out of this article, we came up with 4 of those things, programs. One of the programs said was hotspot policing, focus deterrence, and the focus deterrence sound what Dr. Sedale talked about, the advanced one, which is a wraparound service of social services. And then another program was police-oriented, problem-oriented policing. And it sounded like what Dr. Nelson was talking about, that we law enforcement target in on the source of the crime. And then finally, the other topic program was mass shooting. So that was the area we looked on as 4 different programs that law enforcement could look at as how we could work in the community. Then we looked at another topic, legislation. And we wondered what was the OPD and the Sheriff Department was doing as far as lobbying in Tallahassee for gun violence legislation. And we were able to get Chief Mina's legislative agenda for 2020. It was good to know that one of his legislative agenda for 2020 was to make sure that gun shops and these gun stores had a proper way of securing their guns. So that was one legislation that we was working on. We looked at as far as legislation concerned. And then I said item C, we also looked at identifying strategies that will mobilize the community and enhance engagement. And we looked at several things, what we did in the past and what is working now. And some of the things that we targeted on was that law enforcement engagement without enforcement. We talked about how do we know when law enforcement is in the community, engaged in the community, as opposed to on the job in the community. So we looked at, and we looked at midnight basketball. Those things worked in the past, and can we bring those back? We also talked about community town hall meetings, how we can bring law enforcement and the community together and have a town hall meeting. And then we also looked at transitioning from jail back into the community. And from that discussion, that was our first meeting. From that discussion, we moved to our second meeting, and we brought in 2 speakers. We brought in Ms. Linda Brooks from the Orange County Correction, and we brought in Ms. It's gonna slip me, and that was my supervisor, Colleen Brady from Probation and Parole, because we want to know how we can work together with other law enforcement and what has been happening behind once their offenders are arrested. We learned from Probation and Parole that they are currently working with OPD in Orange County across the board. They work hand in hand. As a probation officer, we did ride along together with the officers and law enforcement rode along together. So we are working together as to how we work together. We also learned from corrections and probation bureau. We want to know what has been done to assist the offenders when they're incarcerated. Correction has a program that working with offenders, and so does probation parole has a program that working with offenders. But we learned from those programs that those programs was most effective when parents or the family is involved, because it's more than just that person that's in probation, and it's more than just that person that's incarcerated. The family is involved, so those programs was most effective when the family got involved. So then we moved on from there, and we had more discussion at our second meeting. We decided that as moving forward, that we need to meet with the prosecution team. Law enforcement can do their part, but it's not going to be effective if the prosecution and we don't work together as a team. So we want to work with prosecution to see how we can work together as a team. So wind this down. We identified recommendations. From those recommendations and the ideas that we came out in our first meeting, we target those recommendations up on each one of our overall task force goal. And we also want to talk with mental health and see how law enforcement could work more closely with mental health. We understand that the OPD is working with that part of the program. And then finally, we want to target this down to Orange County. With probation parole, the question came out, is there a specialized caseload for offenders that has been charged with gun violence? And we want to see that data to see is there enough offenders that's on probation with gun-related violence or gun charges, and can that be a specialized caseload for those offenders? So those are our objectives moving forward. Thank you very much for the time, and thank you for this opportunity.
Yes, thank you very much. And the next report that we'll have is from the prosecution subcommittee. And the co-chairs are Patricia Brigham and also Bishop-elect Derek McRae. And Patricia, can you come and present for us this morning relative to the prosecution subcommittee? And I might just mention that Bishop McRae is not able to be with us today because of a funeral service that he needed to attend. And so we appreciate your presenting. Patty, thanks so much.
Thank you, Co-Chair Coffin and Co-Chair Love, and good morning. It is my honor to co-chair the Subcommittee on Prosecution. The members of our task force or our subcommittee are, of course, Co-Chair Bishop Derek McRae, who, as Co-Chair Coffin explained, could not be here today. Aramis Ayala, the State Attorney for Orange Osceola counties. Jonathan Cox, Roger Handberg, who is a U.S. Attorney, Adam Harnett, Sabish Katil, and Michael Scott, and my thanks to all of them for their enthusiasm and hard work on this subcommittee. This subcommittee has three primary objectives: to increase the effectiveness of gun violence and violent crime prosecution, to identify strategies to build community trust and confidence, and to develop strategies to educate law enforcement and the community on existing safety allowances. As we talked, and we have met twice thus far, we have learned two things in particular. Number one, there is a lack of confidence among many young people and families towards law enforcement. And that is a problem that needs to be solved through an intersectional effort. And the intersectionality of this task force, I think, will be critical to addressing this lack of confidence. We also have discussed at length that this task force, although we are focused on prosecution, we tend to want to discuss intervention and prevention because we don't want to get to the point or we have to prosecute. The whole idea is to get us to the point in our society when we don't see the incredible level of gun violence, and of course that we're seeing here in Orange County, and my deep condolences to the family who have lost a child to another act of violence. We have been looking at certain laws and talking about the rights of victims because we believe the victims' rights are not addressed often enough. Looked at Marsy's Law, which was passed 2 years ago in a constitutional amendment to better protect the rights of victims and to make sure that they receive due process. And also, we have noticed another critical piece that has been missing, and that is education of some specific laws in our state that many of those on our task force did not know about. And one is the Risk Protection Order, which allows a law enforcement officer to directly petition the court on behalf of a family member or a husband or a wife or a child if there is a perception or belief or fear that one of those family members is a threat to him or herself or another person. If the court agrees with law enforcement, then the firearms and magazines can be removed from the home. Now, the current risk protection order is a form of prevention and prosecution. However, it doesn't go far enough, and fortunately there is a bill that has just been introduced for the legislative session of 2021, which would allow not just law enforcement to petition, but a family member to directly petition the court, and that is the true extreme risk protection order that we hope our legislature will pass. We've also looked at the prevalence of domestic violence, particularly towards women, and how this is overlaid in the mapping of violence and homicides in general in Orange County. And we believe it must be folded in. It cannot be ignored. We have been looking at a successful program called High Point, which was developed in North Carolina, and it is based on the Boston ceasefire program developed by David Kennedy out of Harvard University. And what the High Point program does is it puts into categories or alphabetical categories, A, B, C, the most dangerous offender being in the C category. And what would happen with these categorizations of these offenders is that a trusted community member would speak with the offender, the more serious offenders who have committed acts of domestic violence in the past. And by the way, High Point is based on how gun violence has been, or excuse me, how gang violence has been addressed. So it's a very similar program that's been proven to address gang violence successfully. And so this would address domestic violence and warn the offender, if you continue to abuse your spouse, to beat your spouse, you are going to point a gun at your spouse and threaten the lives of your spouse and your children, then you are going to face serious, serious consequences. So once again, this is a combination of prosecution and prevention. What we know, unfortunately, is that gun violence is a public health crisis. Many physicians have come together and said this, and we must continue to look at this not only as a public safety crisis, but as a public health crisis. So we also know that 20% of the people cause 80% of the problems. We have looked at an overview of the prosecution process, and the defined terms that may be used during the course of task force meetings. What I'd like to say in closing, because I don't want to take up too much time, I know that we're almost at the end of our task force meeting, is, and I do want to address the next steps, which I'm having trouble finding. We know that we are limited as to what we can do in local communities because the state of Florida has a preemption program in place that prohibits local communities from putting any kind of restrictions on firearms into place. This presents us with a huge challenge. And so I want to thank Mayor Demings, Co-Chair Love, and Co-Chair Coffin for creating this task force, because I believe this gives us a real chance to stand up to the state of Florida, which is what we must start to do, and say, we demand, our communities demand, the ability to create our own restrictions on firearms. Because if we were not awash in firearms in our local communities, a lot of these problems would be prevented. So our next step, we want to compare the nationwide data with local data, review best practices that are showing some successes. We are looking forward to meeting with the law enforcement subcommittee. We believe we have to have a really uncomfortable and candid conversation with our law enforcement officials. We want to review arrests, prosecutions, and outcomes. We want to see how much these risk protection orders are being activated. And we want to continue to engage with law enforcement officers moving forward, because there is such a connection between enforcement and prosecution, and also working with law enforcement to build the trust of our communities so that law enforcement is not always seen as the quote-unquote bad guy. But again, I want to appeal to everyone here that we face a tremendous challenge because we do not live in a state that allows us to make ordinances or create laws at the local level to decrease the easy access to guns. So it is up to us, every single one of us, to come together and find different kinds of creative outside-of-the-box solutions and to lobby to continue to lobby our state legislators to give more power to the grassroots of Florida. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mayor Demings, as you can hear, we took your charge seriously, and we'll continue to take it seriously. At this point of the task force meeting, our time has expired, and I would ask that you would bear with us because we've allowed time for you to ask questions of those presenters, and that was invaluable. I'm going to ask if you have any comments or statements, if you would be brief, so that we can be respectful, and we do have another subcommittee meeting that follows this meeting. So at this point in time, I'm going to go around. First question over here.
I have a statement. I'm Rachel Allen with the Peace and Justice Institute. We follow principles for how we treat each other, and one of them is to say unpopular things. So in fear that this is an unpopular statement, I just want you to know this is a practice, so that we get to the truth. And so this is my question and statement. Why do we have as a goal to increase prosecution of juveniles? These are children. Are we saying we are in support of the school to prison pipeline? Are we blaming the children for the failings of this community? It's what Randy Nelson just said. Our generations of neglect is now being shouldered by these children. Are we okay with this? What if we were to consider ceasing all arrests of children and directing them to treatment? I move for treatment versus arrest. These are children. Their brains are not fully developed, and they don't have full control over their actions, and we know this based on the neuroscience. Could we support a radical decision for our children as we move forward with this task force? And I just wanted to put that on the table.
Thank you. TJ Legacy, you're recognized.
Testing. Yes, I thank you for saying that, because that's a thought that I also had as well. My comments are for the last presenter and really generally of what kind of took place today. I understand politics is mastering the meeting before the meeting, and I think that today there was a lot of filibustering of information that was presented years ago that could have been better spent hearing from a whole slew of people that took the time out for actually being here today. In hearing community voices. I do want to address the domestic violence portion of it, and I do believe that domestic violence has a part in what we're discussing, but I don't want for it to be lost that 40% of police officers' families experience domestic violence as well. Okay? And as we know, for those who are domestic violence experts, we know that domestic violence has a lot to do with power and control. In our subcommittee, we realize that a lot of times when these hot zone areas are calling law enforcement officers, it's not because of the lack of wanting the officers to intervene. It's how the officers are treating the people in the community once they get there. So we need to analyze how much, and those numbers are skewed because a lot of the victims of law enforcement officers who commit domestic violence acts are afraid to report because they feel like their voices aren't going to be heard because law enforcement officers are already engaged in knowing who to silence or suppress some of those voices. How many of these officers are going into the communities and exhibiting power and control over our youth and then putting charges on them where now they're in a situation where they're on probation, put in a situation where they're violating parole because or missing court dates. So we got to understand that if we're going to talk about violence and domestic violence, we're not just focusing on predominantly African American areas, where we have to focus on the people that are coming into our community exhibiting power and control. And I'm sure law enforcement officers would agree with me, because even just last week, OPD officer was arrested because of domestic violence dispute between him and his ex-girlfriend. So that's something that I believe that we need to focus on if we're going to look at the domestic violence issue in a totality rather than focusing on just the gang violence and the shooting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. TJ Legacy. Any other comment, statement? Mr. Scott.
Sorry, thank you, Chair Love. I just want everybody to know that, I hear family and I hear young man, but, his name was Antoine Roberts and he was 15 years old. I would have asked the sheriff and the chief of police just in conversations, because there's some things that we can do without waiting for the recommendation of the committee. Please have some conversations with your watch commanders and sergeants. Since we've started this process, I do have young men who are still being arrested for minor amounts of marijuana. They're still being arrested for resisting with or without violence. And what that looks like, for those who may not know, is you see a young man or even an adult riding their bicycle. I, as an officer, if I was an officer, I approach them because they don't have a light or some type of reflective device. And instead of maybe educating them or providing them with that device, now I'm having a conversation because you smell like marijuana. And so now I'm having that conversation, and then they resist verbally without violence, or they resist with violence, which usually is a pulling away. So I just want, if you guys could talk with your officers and watch commanders and talk with them, because you repeatedly talk about how we're not arresting for minor marijuana, but if you add a resisting without or resisting with violence, then they're arrested for that charge. So please have those dialogues with your officers in the field, because again, I've had a number of kids that have reached out to me, moms, for those charges, and these kids are still going to jail. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Sheriff Mina, you're recognized.
I'm going to let Miles go first.
Appreciate that.
Miles, you recognize.
All right. So couldn't get the mic on earlier, but
Came in a little bit late, but one of the things I wanted to address with the task force and the meetings that we had with the intervention subcommittee and what we had with the main task force, a lot of the talk we see, some of the stuff we said last time was it's about reviewing and reviewing. And we're reviewing a lot of the practices that's been going on. A lot of them are effective in their own manner, but it seems to be taken away from us having a chance to create new things more and be focusing on what's kind of missing in the void. And when I hear the main focus, it seems the focus is on what is law enforcement doing for community engagement and what is currently in place. And I think if we take off like how OPD kind of just recently did by partnering with Aspire and different mental health partners to kind of respond to calls, we need to follow in the footsteps of not so much building up Orange County or law enforcement's budget to be more engaged, to engage more too, but also focusing on third party and other outside entities and making it more organic. When we talk about ceasefire in the past and other cities and states that have programs like this, the reasons why it's failed in other places is because it was too focused heavily on law enforcement and it wasn't a community and organic type of movement. So even with this task force and when we talk about innovations that come forward, I would like to see the focus be more on how can we empower the community to take some of the slack off of law enforcement and be more engaged, and how can we empower the community so that they don't have to just have more calls of service, they can be building their own way out, because it's always focusing on building up the law enforcement, and we're saying we're responding to the protests when one of the main protest plea was to defund the police. So we talk about defunding the police or reallocating funds, and it comes to a task force meeting, and the main focus is on how we could buster up the funds that the law enforcement has to engage the community. That's the opposite of what we need. So we don't need to just only build up law enforcement or build up the traditional. We need to be bringing some other people into the room who aren't in the funding past or aren't getting the same resources as other groups and empowering them, because those are the groups that are going to be here after the task force is done, after the next elected officials out of office, they're still going to be around.
Thank you. Sheriff, you're recognized.
Yeah, I'll be brief, and I just want to thank some of the subcommittees for addressing some of the systemic issues in our communities. And I had mentioned earlier that cities across the United States are seeing an increase in violence and homicides, and it definitely points to some of the systemic issues in our society. One of the subcommittees brought up the gun safety legislation. I just wanted to give an update on that. Representative Joy Goff Marcil and State Senator Torres sponsored that last year with my support. So they're going to file that bill again with my support. So we're hoping for the committee's or the task force's support as well. I did want to give an update on our task force operations, since a lot of the retaliatory violence and shootings happen. We have the Orlando Police Department, the Orange County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, Florida Department of Law Enforcement been working really hard to curb and deter that violence. I've said this earlier, we know we can't arrest our way out of violence, but we do have some violent actors in our community. So we've made over 175 arrests and taken 75 guns off the streets, and have seen a significant decrease since when we first met related to shootings and retaliatory gang-related homicides. I do want to thank Roger Hamburg from the U.S. Attorney's Office for adopting some of these cases federally. 3 individuals that are from 2 of the groups that we mentioned last meeting committed a very violent carjacking in our community. One received 13 years federal prison time, and one received 8 years federal prison time. And I'm hoping that their fellow members will see that, and that will be a deterrence. No one wants to go to prison for 13 years. So what some of the things we're doing at the Orange County Sheriff's Office, we are reaching out to different agencies, especially across the state of Florida, one specifically Jacksonville, who dealt with a very similar issue of retaliatory violence and shootings about 2 to 3 years ago. So we're actually sending commanders up there to meet with them. They used some pretty interesting crime fighting and investigative tools that really curb the gun violence of their I also do want to mention that we seize a lot of monies in drug forfeitures. Many of you know that. So this year we started our community crime prevention grant program, where we'll be giving away $100,000 to local programs here in this community. Some of those programs maybe not always have a seat at the table and get funding from county or government. So that the deadline for that is December 15th, and we've already had a great response from local 501c3s in this area. I do want to touch on juvenile crime, because our juvenile arrests have decreased by 40% this year, and that is because of a philosophy that many of you have said and in this community. So we are all for that. The last thing we want to do is arrest kids. That's not why any one of us got into law enforcement, is to arrest kids. So we're all for that as well. And then finally, I'll mention it because Miles brought it up about Orlando's program involving mental health. We're starting our own behavioral response unit where we actually pair a deputy with a mental health clinician that will respond to calls with people who are in mental crisis, and they're in training right now and start answering calls here in a couple weeks. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff Mina. I'd like to recognize Chief Roland and turn it back over to my co-chair, Coffin.
Thank you, sir. Just want to keep it very brief. I could not be more clear about this. That I think the sheriff will also definitely echo, which is for our profession, we are with open arms embracing any idea that will reduce the potential for us to have to take someone to jail, to have to respond to a house to domestic violence repeatedly, to have to deal with a youth that could potentially, most definitely would be best to benefit from a program that our community can offer to them to put them on the right track. We've been doing that internally for a very long time, but for me it's very uplifting to have been given the opportunity to be part of this process, because right here is the answer. Working collectively, law enforcement, the community, and one component that I think is missing from this meeting is the business community, how potentially they could be very supportive in funding some of the programs and great ideas that our community members have shared with us during this process. So look forward to continuing to working with you. And again, thank you, Mayor Demings, for the opportunity to be part of this.
My apologies, Bishop Cabarrus, and then Coffin, Chairman Coffin.
Thank you, Co-Chair Love. This is just, I guess, a statement question to our co-chairs. I think that what we heard today is good as it relates to hearing the data report from the various subcommittees of what's going on and the next steps that are being made. But to Miles' point, I would like to say, is there in the meetings to come, will there be an opportunity, like when we receive all of this information, for us as a task again to actually really discuss and ask questions and dive into it as we're building these plans? I ask that because, of course, one of my intervention committee members just made a statement that really has not been addressed. She said, well, instead of arresting juveniles, are you suggesting that we arrest all these juveniles versus them being treated? Then, of course, a pushback could come from that, well, how do you treat a juvenile that could have been possibly responsible for murdering another juvenile yesterday? Do you send them for treatment or do you send them to prison? I think that we need to have some discussions as we are building our intervention, prevention, prosecution, all of these committee enforcement, so that, I mean, some of the things that we're saying are sane, and we just we can work together and our plans can flow together if we have in one of our meetings an opportunity to have open dialogue with one another in the main task force meeting.
Thank you very much.
Can I make a statement too? Sorry, I had my hand up, but you didn't see me. Over here.
Okay, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to welcome everyone. This is the community I belong to that we're meeting in today. And I want to share a story, and I'm really grateful for this extra time that you're staying with us over here. About 2 years ago in my community here, 27 men were arrested for drug trafficking charges. And then about 1 year after that happened, we saw 4 violent crimes perpetrated by and against youth and young adults in this community in one summer. And the connection was very clear to me as someone who's very involved in this community. Those were directly related to those arrests that were made. Parents, role models, adults were removed from our community for basically figuring out a way to provide for their families. And when we do that, we're depleting the social, financial, and emotional resources of the community. So I come to this subcommittee understanding the heaviness of the loss of the person from Paramore, whose name I can't remember, and I apologize for that. But I understand the heaviness of that because these are kids that I work with directly every day who are victims and perpetrators of these violent crimes. So I understand that our criminal justice system is creating more harm than good for our communities. We're perpetuating the problem of community violence by removing parents and caregivers from their communities for minor offenses. And I'd like to also echo Rachel's concern that we are, that if our objective is to increase prosecutions, we are getting it incredibly incorrect and tragically incorrect. To divert to treatment makes so much sense, is supported by research. And I also noticed a common thread throughout many of the presentations of the subcommittee that we have to take a look at legislation, not just our own Orange County or city municipality legislations, but also state level legislations. And I continue to recommend that we have a specific conversation or potentially a specific fifth subcommittee around legislation so we can make those recommendations apparent and clear and a priority in our conversations in this task force.
Thank you very much, Adam. And Bishop, we appreciate your suggestion. And as we plan for future meetings, they can take slightly different forms. They don't have to be exactly the same. And certainly as the subcommittees come to more concrete conclusions, then it's really important for us all to kind of, be the sandpaper to make sure that we're sanding it all down and making it better interconnected and more effective that way. So I'd like to thank all of you for giving us the extra time today. We know you have very busy schedules, and so we appreciate your willingness to allow this conversation to continue a bit further. The next meeting of the full committee, the full task force, will be on January 15 from 2 p.m. until 4 p.m. at the South Econ Park Magic Gym. And so make sure that you have that on your calendar. And actually, in your packet, you'll find that, that information repeated as well. Also, if the committee chairs or even individuals have data that you're seeking that will allow you to more effectively make decisions and suggestions and recommendations, please feel free to contact Carol Burkett, and she will try to go to the appropriate agency to get that information for you. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Carol for the way that she has already done much of that and has already pulled many of these things together for us. Also, we would remind you that, that there is a website, and the website is going to have more and more information put onto it. And that will be a great resource for all of us as well as for the entire community. And that website is citizensafety@ocfl.net. And if you haven't checked it out yet, I would encourage you to do so. So again, we thank all of you for the work you're doing, for your willingness to speak up, for your willingness to share your convictions and your observations and your insights. And we're delighted that you were here today. And Co-Chair, any other comment you want to make, and then we'll conclude the meeting.
I'm just going to close to say to the task force members, we have 2 months, just about 2 months or so left. Let's continue to push the envelope. I want to say to staff, we have been pushing staff. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I want to defer any other closing I have to you, but I want to recognize you because this committee will push the envelope, and we appreciate you allowing us to do that.
Thank you.
Let me just say this. I'm encouraged by the dialogue that I'm hearing. None of us individually have all of the answers or the solutions to the problems or the challenges that we're trying to address. But I do believe that collectively, if you continue to remain focused, the goal is to end with something that can be implemented within this community that will outlive all of us. So don't be bashful in your commentary. Everyone may not agree with you. Remember that. And just because you make statements, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily right. It doesn't mean that you're wrong. But at least you should have the opportunity to be heard, and then the collective has to make some decisions. This is not a group that was put in place to be steered by the government. It really was put in place to only have government help facilitate the conversation. When you make your recommendations, again, the goal is to take those recommendations and then to institutionalize them in the way we have the ability to bring together all segments of our community to have some skin in the game. And I remain optimistic that we can get there. This is something that must last for the long haul. I know that many of you have been doing this work for a while and you get frustrated. But you should not be deterred by your frustration. These issues are complex issues. They're emotional issues. So remain in the fight. That is my commitment to you, is to listen to you and then to respond appropriately. Again, thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Can I ask a question before we adjourn? It's me again, over here, Adam. So we had some pretty major recommendations throughout the public or open discussion that aren't being addressed or discussed. I realize we're at the end of our meeting, but I'm wondering how to address some of those recommendations for our task force.
Carol, can I ask if we would take those recommendations and go ahead and send them out to the entire task force? But what I'd like in particular is for each of those subcommittee task force, because they're meeting more regularly than the full task force, let's get feedback from those subcommittee task force members and bring it to the full floor at the next meeting.
Absolutely. I'll make sure we do that.
Thank you.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.